Okay, if you've got strong opinions on NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, you have less than 9 hours to tell the government, specifically the U.S. trade representatives. There's a midnight deadline to submit comments before the administration takes its next steps toward renegotiating the agreement which President Trump calls the worst trade deal ever. So far, you ready for this? The office has received 11,014 comments. That's a lot. Many of them look like this. Jim Hopkins from South Carolina, he's in the textile business. We pulled these off the website, by the way, where you can issue your comments online. He says the biggest obstacles to doing business in Mexico have not been the agreement itself, but the ever-increasing rules and regulations implemented by the Mexican government. We got this one, Phyllis Siegel. She runs a cosmetics company in San Antonio, Texas. She says tariffs would be devastating to our business model and bottom line, meaning tariffs of products coming in for them to make products to send out. The leaders of Mexico and Canada certainly have their own thoughts on this. Joining us now in a Fox Business exclusive to explain the views of our neighbor to the north, David MacNaughton. He's the Canadian ambassador to the U.S. Welcome, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it makes sense. Look, this is a quarter-of-a-century trade agreement old. It's rather old. And if anybody bought a car or a computer or struck a legal deal, it would probably, after a quarter of a century, be tweaked. Is Canada open to modernizing, altering, or changing it?
Well, for sure we are. And right after the U.S. election, the day after the U.S. election, I said to a group of journalists that we were ready to sit down with the United States and Mexico as soon as they were ready to modernize NAFTA and to try to bring it up to date. You know, I joke that in 1994, when the deal was done, if you asked people what's Amazon, they would have said it was a river in South America, and today they'd probably give you a different answer. So there's lots of changes that have happened in our economy, and I think we need to update the deal to make it better for Americans, for Canadians, and for Mexicans.
One of the questions was that, again, a great deal has changed, and as you modernize the deal, the modernization also includes old school industries like the dairy industry, which feels, and perhaps rightly so if you really look at the facts, that Canada is pushing out U.S. imports to Canada. Would you be open to changing something like that to make it fairer?
Well, I think, you know, fairness is is different depending on which side of the border you're on. There's 5 times more dairy exports from the United States to Canada than there are from Canada to the United States. So, you know, dairy exports from the United States have been up substantially over the last few years. We're happy to talk about any aspect of the deal. But I think, you know, what Secretary Ross said last week, I think is really important. Commerce Secretary Ross, he said, first, do no harm. And I think we've got to keep that in mind, and that is we can build on this relationship. We can make it better for America. We can make it better for Canada and better for Mexico. But we got to be careful that we don't do things that are going to harm U.S. workers. There are 9 million jobs in the United States that are dependent on trade with Canada. I don't think we want to see that disrupted.
Well, we've been perusing we're going through, sifting through some of these 11,000 comments, and I was on the website looking at it, and it's the U.S. Trade Representative Regulatory page that anybody can look at, by the way. And again, you have till 9 p.m. Eastern to make a comment. But there are people, there are business owners who say, leave it the way it is, but others who feel that they've gotten the short end of the stick. But I want to shift to data. Back in 1992, data was not something that was bought or sold in grand scale efforts. So what do you make of that? How would we add that into NAFTA?
Well, I think that there are some very important things with regard to data. It's obviously a growing field. I think we have to be really careful as we update these agreements and change things as far as data are concerned. You know, to protect cybersecurity, to make sure that, you know, there's individual protection for privacy and things like that. But, you know, there's an awful lot of scope for improving things. And, you know, you just mentioned a minute ago regulation. One of the things that we've been working with the administration on is how do we find ways to harmonize regulations between Canada and the United States, whether that's within NAFTA or just even separately,
right.
To make it easier for small, medium-sized businesses on both sides of the border to do business without it costing too much money. And I think we've had a great response from the administration, and I think you're going to see some really good news on that front, and then again, the months to come.